Lynn Thurston's basically going to come up and talk about the Vacation Software Advisory Group project, what the purpose of the group has been, and the participants, the process, and then the preliminary findings, which I think is what most people in this room are here to hear. What did we find? So this group was initiated a couple months ago, actually, before the recent news of some industry changes. And the goal of the software advisory group was to take a look at essentially what we felt was a hole in the industry, which was the lack of standards, particularly on the API side, and also to the lack of enterprise software. And there's certainly some debate about what's considered to be enterprise software, but we defined it as essentially software where companies who have more complex operations, either because of number of units, because of geographical complexity, because of multi-destination, enterprise is a more complicated type of system. But given the consolidation in the industry and given what seems to be happening throughout the world where there's consolidation, enterprise software becomes critical for companies that want to grow to continue to scale. So Lynn will talk about the participants who joined, and it's really two groups, right? So it's a group of property managers, and then it's been a group of suppliers who have been working on API standards, because the API standards go hand in hand with the enterprise standards as well. And Lynn Thurston over here has been doing this as the project manager with assistance, a heavy amount of assistance from Tom Leddy, who many of you know is a system architect. He's a system architect, probably 30 years of software experience. So, Lynn's been really kind of trying to pull together the business requirements, and then, Tom is in the process of translating those requirements into technical specification. So, both Lynn and Tom have been doing a tremendous amount of work, and I'm going to let Lynn now come up and talk about her findings. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Okay. You've read, and Steve has outlined the agenda. So it's a small group, which means we can be pretty informal. And so Steve outlined, too, that the project was initiated as actually a 120-day project. And it was initiated in May, well before the recent announcements with respect to V12. The project has not completed yet. So what you're going to get is you're going to get a snapshot of what we've done to date, with the understanding that there's more to come. Okay? We took the approach that many of you might be familiar with in terms of human-centered design principles, and that is actually talking to people who are living the experience of actually using an enterprise software program. Okay, so this is very different than kind of a top-down approach whereby people say, oh, this is what you need. No, we're talking to people who have been using an enterprise software program, and we asked them to participate in this because they really do have the necessary experience. So the other component of the project is that it's collaborative. The property management companies were asked to come together to actually look at the definition of a future software roadmap for an enterprise system. So as Steve explained, enterprise is different because of the complexity, and the notion too, everybody joined knowing that, look, we're going to be fully transparent. There's no secrets here. We're going to share the results, and we'll see what comes out of this. Now, the objective was to do something that's extremely practical. It's not a theoretical kind of or project at all. It's if you're looking at transitioning to an enterprise software program, what are the core and key components you need in that program? Okay? So it's kind of like a practical checklist for anybody that might be looking to the future. And these are the participants. We had over 6,000 vacation rentals under management by the companies that we worked with who joined the project. And they ran vacation rentals, and you can read just as well as I can, motels and even B&Bs. So as Steve mentioned, there was another component to this, and that was our third-party vendors. And these people represent what you see here, like different segments, different benefits or features of a software program, right from CRM through analytics to housekeeping and maintenance operations. Okay? Here are the people that participated. So you'll recognize many of the names, I'm sure, and you'll see that there are some pretty key players in the industry. So what was the process? Well, Steve put out an open invitation to people that were kind of running enterprise operations, and there was information out there through VRM Intel as well. When people came together, the first thing we did, well, we asked them, what are your top 10 business software priorities, and what are the current gaps you're facing? Because this was really important. And what do you project that you're going to need down the road? So basically, we were looking at having a baseline, right? I mean, we used, and many of these companies used V12 as their baseline, right? Because it was one of the programs that's out there that was most aligned with many of the enterprise requirements. So when we looked at a baseline, we were looking at companies that have a good accounting module, right? They've got trust accounting nailed. There's a number of things that are in place. And so people then were looking at what are the gaps that they're experiencing in an enterprise system. We also went in and we looked at V12's open ticket analysis. Now the notion here was that those open tickets might provide some additional insight into gaps, right? Because if they're open tickets that all of the companies were experiencing, that could identify another gap in the software programs that we're looking at. So the end result was that we had over 100 issues and priorities. So first, the companies identified their own top 10 requirements. Then everybody's was consolidated, and we went back to all of the companies and said, okay, from this consolidated list, what would be your top 10? Okay? Now, the other thing we did is we wanted to have this, this API and third-party vendor group. So we asked the property management companies who they were using, and we asked them actually to score their level of satisfaction with them. Okay, it's like who scored low, medium, and high. And then what we did was we invited those third-party vendors to the table, okay? And we asked them, and this part is still in process, we said, okay, what are your top API requirements? And really, what would it take to put those in place? We asked them, okay, what key fields do you need? you know, what do you need to map to a property management system? What are your concerns regarding barriers to entry? I mean, you know, what's holding you up, in effect? And they suggested that, a really good thing to do would be to score the different software companies on their willingness and their ability to facilitate kind of connectivity. All right? Again, high, medium, and low. So I'm going to go through the preliminary findings, as Steve mentioned. And what I'd like you to do is, in looking at these preliminary findings, I don't want you to say, oh yeah, I know that, I know that, I know that. I want you to say, would this be my top list of priorities? Okay, so that's the optic in which you want to look at it. Would this be important to me moving forward? Okay, so number one, this was unanimous, is everybody wants a reliable open API. It has to have great integrations, you know, not only with basic, you know, CRM functions, but with phone platforms, email messaging, et cetera. They want a direct connection to the OTAs and easy to set up. One of the things that they were really insistent on is that these third-party vendors must provide really good documentation, because there was a concern that it just wasn't out there yet in terms of good documentation. In terms of rates, everyone felt that there needs to be a better rate management interface. Steve highlighted, and others agreed, that the Google rate importer-exporter must be supported so that rates can be better managed outside the property management system. Rate call speeds must be quicker. This was an issue that also came up with our Open API team. And that channels have to more flexibly support different rate plans. Nightly rates need to be supported, because, I mean, this is the way the industry is moving. Dynamic rate management, people still are not particularly happy with the capabilities out there quite yet. And both groups said, look, you know, we really need to have a rate tester prior to distributing rates. In terms of fees, people said the fee options need to be able to deal with greater complexity, you know, multi-pets, multi-car passes, et cetera. And there also has to be the ability to have more complexity in terms of how fees are split between the owner and the property management manager, and other players that are involved as well. In terms of contracts, people wanted more capabilities in terms of setting up owner contracts. They wanted to allow multiple owner email addresses, different commission structures, different owner revenue splits, things that you know, enterprise companies are doing, but it's not easy to do within the current software configurations. In terms of channel choices, different commission structures based on dates. So this whole area of contracts was really concerning to many, many people, because it was difficult to set them up, hard to change, and they couldn't be really flexibly managed. Operations, there are big discussions about operations, and one of the huge things here, and many of you who are running kind of enterprise companies will understand this, is the whole two-way communication is required, along with greater billing automation, and the integration with accounting is absolutely critical. Manual entry has got to go. And you can read the last one there. They want a fully integrated ticket management system for, by reservation, so that allows people to look at what's going on at the reservation level for maintenance, housekeeping, etc. In terms of pictures and images, there really needs to be a state-of-the-art system, and people want some flexibility on what they put on their photos. Guest portals came up. People are not happy when they don't have the ability to support the company branding. Upselling is really important in the guest portal. And of course, companies do have the ability to have the electronic rental agreements, but this is mission critical. On the owner portal, there were a number of issues that people highlighted. First off, a more intuitive owner portal containing much better statements, the ability for greater analytics, and also more flexibility about what the owner sees and doesn't see. And people were talking too about more kind of futuristic owner statements, whereby they can reduce the amount of time and effort that their staff and the owners are engaged with in terms of making changes to recommended rates and pricing in the system. Reports, people have some real concerns about current reports. The customization is what's really a big issue for people, and the amount of time and effort it takes to do reports. And the second one talks about filtering and copying. I just finished reading the book on coders, and one of the things that it highlights about software programmers is just how focused they are on efficiency. And what we need to see in the industry is greater focus on operational efficiency from our software programmers to ensure that a property management company is not faced with inefficiency in terms of their operations. Like even just the inability to copy and paste information from one kind of unit to another, or inability to search well. That's a big issue for a lot of people. In terms of CRM, people want to be able to search all communications in multiple ways, by unit, employee name, guest, owner, work orders. This includes reservation notes, owner requests, follow-up actions, guest communications, reviews. So they really want to be able to have greater search capability. Some companies have the ability to merge duplicate guest records. This is important. Text messaging, communications, being able to track those. And a CRM that actually integrates all department silos is required. The reservations side of things, people really want to have the ability to create different types of reservations tied directly to booking rules, deposit policies, and add-ons. And this whole speed thing has got to be enhanced, because having a reservationist sit on the phone making small talk, while a system is taking its time to do a search, is very challenging. In terms of the user enterprise, people really want something that's more user-friendly, and they want multi-window viewing. User permissions was also highlighted, and this basically is the ability to track who made a change to anything in the system, whether it was logging an owner request, is very important. Okay, so those are the highlights. Now, as I said, there was 100+ issues, so we're looking at all of the issues, and they're as Steve mentioned, Tom will be kind of looking at what's required to translate those. We also came up, and this is a draft, with a conceptual framework for an enterprise software roadmap. And we're working on this, but basically what you see here is you have your PMS, you've got your API, and then you have the different partner links. And this is why it becomes very important to have an open API. And we're working with our API or with our third-party vendor groups to really identify what fields are critical to have in the core property management system and what fields might best reside in the partner software. Okay? So this is a draft, and as I mentioned, we're going to be continuing to work on this, but it's that kind of conceptual framework that we're thinking about. So in terms of our expected outcomes and timeframes, the Open API group, their priorities and their recommendations are going to be provided by the end of August. And then we'll be analyzing those and sharing those with you and everyone that's interested. So we're looking at having a draft roadmap by the end of September, and then that'll be shared, modified based on your feedback. And then by the October timeframe, we're going to be able to lay out our findings and what the property managers are recommending and what the third-party vendors are recommending. Okay? So it's really that kind of bottoms-up, participatory, transparent framework that we're working from. Okay, so Steve and I'd like to open it up for questions and ideas, thoughts, comments, and please go ahead. And Steve has a mic too, so.
Once you have the full report, you said you're giving it to all the big software providers and saying, hey, this is your product roadmap. I don't think this works. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Yeah, once you have the full report in October, besides managers, who's getting that? Are the software providers getting it and saying, hey, if you want to continue servicing these managers or this industry, here's what you need to build? What's the objective with the report?
The objective, is that very practical component that you just mentioned. The objective of this is to make this available for whomever would like to move forward on the development of an improved enterprise software program. So that's the objective, and we can't dictate that, but we do feel it's time for the property managers to really come together, and our valued third-party members, and say, you know what, this is really what we think we need. What do you think? So that's the spirit.
Right. So, part of this was if it was just one property manager who said, this is what we want, it looks like a property manager wish list or a customized system. By going through a process with a number of different enterprise customers in a number of different locations, and it being a situation where Lynn really vetted them out and kind of really went, these people spent a ton of time providing input and tickets and all of the things that were functional problems. So now we have what we believe is a roadmap for software companies who want to build enterprise, if they want to. And not every company is going to want to build an enterprise system. But we wanted to at least provide a roadmap to these software companies and let them know these are the priorities. This is what's mission critical. And as you noted, some of this really starts with system architecture. Just really, the entire component of how you set your system up. So I think one of the functions that was the number one function was API. Well, if you start to look at things as API, cloud-based, you get out of some of the clunkiness of what we've seen with database systems that are 10 or 15 or 20 years old. Other questions? No other questions here? Okay.
I did see a couple of great companies participating, but I didn't see any of the OTAs in this project. Are they not a big, important part of this? Because they are like, the ones driving what information you need to push in the API and how you structure it.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no, we talked about this.
we're not developing systems for OTAs. We're developing systems for property managers. The OTAs, and the whole point of what we're doing is creating API standards. So the API standards, if you set them up and they become standards for the industry, hopefully OTAs who want our business will work with them. I mean, they have the most resources by far, right? We're more concerned with the smaller companies out there that are supporting smart home technology, noise devices, pricing tools. They don't have anywhere near the resources, right? So I think what's happened is it's almost been backwards. These companies are trying to chase the OTAs to create systems for their standards, as opposed to enterprise companies, enterprise software industry coming together and saying, look, these are the standards we've agreed to. It's in everybody's best interest to agree to standards, because then we're not burning all of these resources, essentially creating multiple APIs on the fly. And it's been a huge resource drain. And if we've talked to the suppliers and the vendors, one of the things that's been most frustrating is the amount of wasted time that vendors have to spend chasing all these various APIs. And some of the OTAs are literally making changes on the fly with API, and then vendors are having to essentially do emergency fixes. And this is just counterproductive to the industry. It's just a terrible waste of resources. Do you have anything you want to add on that, Lynn?
No, just to agree, and as we said, we're really coming from the perspective of the property management companies themselves and people that are trying to support those property managers. So one of the things as well is, even if you're not going to be running an enterprise level system, this is going to be helpful information, because you're going to be able to hopefully see that, okay, there's kind of this little checklist that I can look at to see, is this something that's in a certain kind of software company's program, or is it not? If it's there, to what level is it there? And that'll be the due diligence that each of you do as you're deciding what software company to embrace. But you're going to at least have this framework. So it really is something for property managers and our valued third-party providers.
One of the pink elephants I haven't seen, and I just wondered if it had come up, because I'm a vendor, not a software. I'm a software company, not a vacation rental manager. Is the trust accounting just saying all the balancing at the end of the month? Was that not a huge part of what they said? Could we just have something that just worked at the end of the month and balanced my trust account?
Yeah, you'd think that'd be pretty basic, wouldn't you?
It's never basic.
Yeah, and this is where I mentioned earlier that this project was really a gap analysis, right? It looked at what wasn't there. So in the well-performing, or at least quasi-semi well-performing enterprise software that was out there, I mean, trust accounting is kind of a baseline. So we assumed a baseline that would incorporate and have that trust accounting. And it is acknowledged that some of the software that we're seeing developed or that's out there, you know, is really kind of, it's lacking in terms of some of this baseline accounting, if I can be quite honest. It's my opinion, but I'll share it honestly. It's a small group of people. And that's one of the big challenges. So now what we're doing, and Tom, Steve, and I have talked about this, is we're really in that final report going to see if we can scope out that baseline a little bit better than we had initially envisioned that we would have to do. But as a result of changes with HomeAway, we feel that that is a service that we'd like to be able to provide to the property management community. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Steve. Yeah, it answers my question. I just want to make it really clear that you're putting those specs up and saying, okay, your thing was for anybody that wants to do an enterprise system, here are our specs. I would make sure that I put those things that you think the hardest part of all this that you're talking about is the trust accounting part.
Thank you for that. So yeah, the ideas and suggestions and comments, you know, are really welcome. So thank you.
In doing this, are you guys hoping to find an existing solution that's going to adapt and change, or someone that's new and providing them a roadmap? I mean, because the all-in-one solutions that are database driven and kind of are stuck there, are you guys seeing that they're going to be able to adapt and change and do everything they need to do to get to this? Or I'm kind of phrasing my question two ways. Or are you seeing that the newer, fresher companies with the cleaner API are the way that you're leaning? Do you really care?
Yeah, Steve can answer, and I'll chime in.
Yeah, I think the goal is hopefully multiple companies commit to enterprise. You know, what we would like and what we think is in the best interest of the industry property managers is for them to have multiple choices. So we're hoping, you know, the property management community that is looking at the enterprise segment as an opportunity for investment, right? So, you know, part of this, it's a two-way street. We recognize that companies that have software systems to do this is going to be a lot of resources, and those resources come at a cost. And so they have to make a bet that if they do it, there'll be an audience, right? So we didn't know when we started this that there would actually be, you know, a major enterprise system that would be sunsetting. So I think at this point, they probably recognize there are clients, if they had an enterprise system that, you know, that would meet some of this. The other component, CJ, is instead of taking a look at this and trying to do this kind of a piece at a time, we're hoping that these enterprise companies, software companies that are looking to do enterprise, look at this from a holistic standpoint. Because some of this is really core system architecture. And I mean, you know, one of the things that Lynn talked about was CRM, and just my experience is that there are many people working for software companies that aren't property managers. And they don't use the software the way that we use it, which is why we scoped it, right? So, but if they used it the way we did, they would understand some of the usability issues. So CRM becomes a critical issue where there's pieces of data all over the place in a lot of these systems. again, if you start to look at that roadmap, I don't know if you want to go back to it, but that diagram, which was essentially, if you really fundamentally start with a database and then an API, and then you start to push everything into clouds, you start to build a much superior product. It's more flexible, it's more adaptable into the future. And I think, hopefully, again, we're trying to provide a roadmap. We've essentially done some of the heavy lifting by saying, okay, instead of you spending all this time trying to scope this out, we've come in and we've spent time, and we've had some great volunteers who have helped scope this out. We're going to turn the business requirements into technical requirements, and then we're hoping, and there's some software companies in this room clearly, that the software companies then look at this and say, okay, we have what appears to be a pretty clear roadmap. Let's figure out how to make this work.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that I would add to that.
Yeah, got some experience with legacy systems, and re-engineering a legacy system into new operations is not easy. But I guess one question I have with the new tools that are coming out, would property managers be willing to put things such as availability, guest reviews of the property owners into a blockchain environment where they are accessible directly versus through an API? Because I think you're going to see the next generation of software that is coming out have some of those capabilities that will be quicker, faster, easier. Because I think really what you're looking at is something that's built from the ground up with new tools, because it's just to get what you really need, that's really what's required at some point. But just wanted to is that something that property managers would consider, because that might be losing some of the control, some of the exclusivity with homeowners? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll answer that real quick. So again, if we look at this dialogue, and I know there's some people on the phone, Lynn will share this deck, but it's incomplete, yeah. Right? So you're just seeing essentially a very broad outline of the scope that'll be delivered. So if anybody thinks, wow, this is kind of limited, believe me, Tom and Lynn are working on true business requirements and true technical requirements. So this is just highlight data that we promised. But if we take a look at CRM, right, customer relationship management, and we take a look at what it really means, and why we put it in an open API. Why? Because there's elements of customer relationship that happen outside of the PMS. What Ted just described is what we all on the property management side feel. We're getting all of this data from social media and OTAs on guest feedback, as well as within our own system. And it's all in a bunch of different places. If we truly want to create a better industry, right, a better guest experience, we need it in one place so that when we have a conversation with an owner, we can communicate to the owner that these are the issues with your property, and if we want to improve reviews, they need to make an investment into their property. This also comes into place with how we respond to guest issues as well. Right now, a lot of us in property manager are chasing our tails because there's so many ways that information is coming to us, and a lot of the ways is not an enterprise level process, right? So you have information coming from a Facebook account or a Twitter account or a Better Business Bureau email or property support or caseworker at one of the OTAs. And all of this information is coming at you in different forms as opposed to a cloud-based system, right? An open API, cloud-based system where that data then could be housed and we can then do searches and we can pull stuff up. The other thing is when we have service orders where we're trying to fill a problem, we can tie it back to the CRM and communicate, hey, we've done a work order, we fixed this problem. Management response. So what Ted is saying is very, very accurate. And look, I mean, 10 years ago, this wasn't an issue. It's an issue today, and it's only the amount of information coming at us from a property management standpoint is only going to get more complex, which is why, if you look at this chart, CRM is a cloud. Pricing is a cloud. Operations is a cloud. Distribution we know is a cloud, or should be a cloud. Website's a cloud. That's why the API component is super critical.
And I'd also say, in response to Ted's insight, we're looking at this kind of a conceptual framework so that those who are providing these services in the cloud can determine, is blockchain going to be more effective? Is that going to be one of their kind of operational competitive advantages, right? So instead of having everything built into the property management system and kind of locked in there, we're thinking that there's going to be greater flexibility to be able to integrate kind of things like blockchain, AI, what's coming at us today. So that's kind of the concept that we're working on. But thanks for raising that. Thank you very much.
So the API sounds like a very critical component. Are there any plans or ideas on who will be managing and maintaining that once defined, and even who will define it?
Well, I think this is the first attempt to create true API standards. Once this project is finished in September, we're all going to meet again at VRMA in October, probably around noon. I think that's October 13th. And we're going to talk, and it'll be an open meeting just like this, about what I think is a critical component of this, standards, API standards. Again, I know there's probably a mixture of vendors here and property managers. Some of the property managers may not understand the pain that the vendors feel about API, but it's real pain. And it's also really, from their standpoint, real cost that they incur from a resource standpoint, spending time, spending man hours or people time to fix API issues, particularly API issues that are crisis issues, things that break because things are changed without notice. If you have standards, and I think as an industry we could agree that standards would then eliminate some of the support costs, and those support costs could then be put into building the product out. So it's beyond time to create standards for the industry. Now that doesn't mean that people, software companies, OTAs can do whatever they want, but again, if they're looking to maximize their own revenue, hopefully they'll realize that, it's in everyone's best interest to create these standards.
Yeah, exactly.
Amy, no question?
Yeah, I've got time. I think, so I get to talk to a lot of people in the industry on a pretty regular, admittedly, basis. And so I get to talk to a lot of the software companies too, and I guess the leverage, I think Lynell and I have had this conversation, the number of enterprise level companies seems to be getting smaller, and especially traditional leisure enterprise level companies. So in talking to some of the software companies, it's almost thankless, for them to keep on building and building and building and trying to get to this holy grail of enterprise level systems that doesn't seem, where the requirements don't seem to end. And I think that, playing devil's advocate for a second, is there any leverage for them right now? Is there any real incentive to work with these, for the software companies to keep on like trying and adjusting, and when what they're really, when they're thinking like, and I've talked to a lot of them, they're kind of saying, well, we'd rather build what's right for 80% of the industry and keep selling that. Like Gessie and Kigo, these guys have like a lot of customers who are fine with what they have. And then you've got this top tier of enterprise level companies that it's almost impossible to get to what they need. So I'm just curious what the leverage is, if there's any kind of idea to get to a place that you're trying to encourage them to do it.
Okay, so did you see the one thing that's not on here? Cost. Now, I don't want to speak for other property managers. Cost was not a priority. In other words, enterprise companies are willing to pay for more functionality, better systems, because right now they're paying it in resources. Make a better system, you have less personnel resources, less crisis, better ability to manage your owners, your guests. Cost was never, I never heard cost brought up in any of the meetings, that they wanted something cheaper. So enterprise companies are willing to pay, and I think the thing about enterprise companies is they have the revenue, right? So most systems out there are based either on a percentage of revenue or number of units. You can have one client base that, can have a lot of revenue and a lot of units, relatively straightforward in terms of support. Larger enterprise companies tend to have internal support. So once you get through the front end of onboarding and support, your costs diminish. I'm not going to say there's zero cost for enterprise, but again, you have people on an enterprise company who essentially are doing a lot of support internally. Lynn?
Well, and the other thing that I wonder, I don't know the answer, but one of the things that I wonder is that if there's a software roadmap that incorporates kind of this conceptual framework, might smaller companies also be interested? And might they like a model that has greater flexibility associated with it, as opposed to looking at a software program that has kind of everything kind of built in. And so that's one of the things I don't know, Amy, but I'm kind of curious, because I think that one of the other things that we're hearing is that sometimes some of the things that are built in are not meeting the needs of even the smaller or the medium-sized company. Lynn raised the issue quite nicely in terms of kind of the accounting modules, for example. So I don't know the answer. I think we'll know better as Tom builds this out in a little bit more detail. So, but that's one of the things that I have in mind. And then the other thing is something that Scott mentioned yesterday about the coexistence, the ability to have coexistence amongst kind of different components, like a flexible model, a model that has things that are built in. It may well serve different segments of the industry. So it's an excellent question. I think we'll probably know a little bit more after we get into that October timeframe. So thank you.
And Amy, I kind of wanted to jump into, I've been thinking a lot about that, the leverage question. And I think back to San Antonio when the HomeAway acquisition started and the uproar that we had then. And I think the software companies, to an extent, know that it's hard to switch. And so making it easy to switch or giving you kind of an attractive carrot to go their direction. There's a lot of power in that. You talk about the leverage, the enterprise companies are shrinking, but at the same time, we still have a lot of units under management. We still have a lot of cloud if there's an organized effort to move in a particular direction. So I think that kind of like Book Direct was a tremendous success, and hopefully it's the beginning of an even bigger movement. I think that with a project like this, if the enterprise companies can kind of coordinate their efforts, really try and find solutions that work for us, that we have more leverage than we think we do, if we kind of just sit back and look at what menus currently available to pick a software flavor from.
Hold on, let's get Jeremy first. I'll come back.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to build on what, sort of going back to what CJ said and a little bit from Amy on the leverage. I think it'd be an interesting exercise coming out of this to think about not just setting up a roadmap, but setting up an inspiration for all the other managers. Like, I think the enterprise clients are in a position to take some weight off of the PMS systems and the vendors and make a decision to say, hey, look, like, we're going to set a direction for the industry. You may want to go with an all-in-one solution, but it's not necessary. And we appreciate that it's not necessary, and we're giving everybody sort of the leeway and the ground to build up that ecosystem. And in fact, we think as enterprise managers, there's advantages to that. We might not choose that. We might choose an all-in-one solution. We might not. But we think there's advantages to that, so how it can be built. And I think what you'd see is, there's like a personality disorder sometimes here with like what people want and then what they can get and then how this works with resources. And I think there's a misalignment. And I think as an industry, this is a great opportunity. The byproduct of this could be a really great opportunity to say, hey, it's okay. This is the ecosystem we're going to work in. And we're going to make it work for everybody. And it's going to inspire the little managers too. Because I actually think Amy's totally on target. There really aren't enough enterprise managers. I mean, those were all of them on the board, basically. And, like, it's not that many. And, like, I know cost isn't a huge issue now. We're not talking about cost now. But you will in the end. It will come back to roost in the end. And there is a limit to it. And there's a limit to the functionality that these systems can build. So you have a good chance here to point these systems in the right direction and say, hey, this is what's critical for my PMS. This is what I really, really need. And it's a non-starter. These are the other things I'd love to have, but this is a non-starter. And then it's got to work with these other people.
Well, again, we try to define what enterprise is because sometimes enterprise isn't just a number of unities, it's complexity. And again, multi-destination. I'd say that in some of the conversations we've had with property managers, even here, we're starting to see inventory growth again on the resort side. We've certainly seen it on the urban side. I would not discount that we're going to start to see, more and more enterprise demands. And again, cost never came up, right? So I think, what companies will find is property managers will pay for the right systems that support their needs.
I have one comment and then one question. The comment is, for software providers, this exact exercise, people put a lot of time, money, energy into doing it. And I just want to thank you all and everybody who's participated. And you have full-time jobs, and then you went and did this. So thank you. It's a benefit to everybody. The question is, some enterprise customers were not up there because they've built their own systems, right? They've looked at the market and said, look, no one's doing what we need or where we're going, so we're just going to build it ourselves. Has there been any conversation with any of those to license what they've built? I'm looking at Scott, but I mean, there's more than one. There may be two.
Well, anyone that has built a system, so Scott, you're welcome to take this document, license out the Vacasa software system. So we want multiple options, not just one or two. Did you want to say something, Scott?
Good morning, everybody staring at me now. I would say that a little bit of this is chicken and egg. We built our own system because we were on Escapia. I don't know if anybody knew that 10 years ago we were on Escapia. And then we built a system to do all the things that Escapia didn't do, and then that just became the system. So I would say to the vendors in the room, the list is short because of your software. So if you want more people on that list, build what they're asking.
This is Ryan. I'm with a software provider. So I think what's interesting is over a decade ago, you saw a lot of this in the hotel industry. A group formed, htng.org. It's the standard specs that were built in the hotel industry, and it was the hospitality technology next generation. And so that group, Disney, Marriott, Accor Hotels, came together similarly like this to build the standards, and it didn't just impact the enterprise companies, it impacted the entire industry. And so I think that it was encouraging is that putting this together helps not just standardize for the enterprise, but it's going to help standardize for the industry as a whole. And it helps companies, if you go the full platform, or if you go with an Opera in the hotel industry, or you decide to go with different tool sets to make the guest experience better, at least you have a formula and an architecture that we as software providers can build to in the hotel industry. So I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's going to make it even that much easier on the software providers to have standardization. So.
Okay. Oh, we have time for one more question, then we have to wrap up. Give it over here to Scott.
So one thing I'd like to see from the supplier side, as long as we're talking about things like standardization, is for us to consider the nomenclature that we use. From a supplier perspective, we have to adapt to every single software system because they all use different terms for everything, and we use different terms for everything. And so as our industry matures, we may cherish those terms that we've always held dear, but we're going to have to get to the point where we're talking the same language.
So I want to thank Amy Highnote for allowing us this room. I know that originally this was a data conference, and now it became more than data, it became technology and standards and API. But I appreciate Amy putting this event on first and foremost, and then allowing us to have have access to this room early in the morning. I appreciate everybody who came out. Lynn, you want to say anything? Otherwise, we'll be meeting again in New Orleans.
Yeah, and I just want to thank all of the property management companies and our third-party vendors, because it has been noted that they've spent a tremendous amount of time. And as Scott said, everybody's kind of using different kind of data fields and, having to connect into different property management systems to find those aligned data fields. So hats off to the people that have joined this project, because standardizing those is going to be tremendously important, I think, for everybody. So there are some of the companies here that we've highlighted. So please take the opportunity to talk with them. And I'll also just, as Steve said, we're going to share the deck with anybody who'd like to have it. And this is also the contact information for Steve, Tom Letty, and myself. If you have additional ideas, thoughts, comments, everything is welcome. So thank you so much.
So again, if you haven't made travel plans to New Orleans, we're looking to have another one of these events probably at lunch on, I think it's Sunday the 13th, October 13th. So lunch or brunch or something like that. And, we'll be providing details, but, either fly in early on the 13th or come in on Saturday night, spend an extra night in New Orleans. Obviously, this shows how important this is by the attendance at this early morning. I think we'll have a lot more tangible information to share, and then we can discuss steps moving forward. So thank you, everyone. Thank Amy for allowing us access to the room.